The agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Post Lance Armstrong, is there anyone from the world of cycling that we can believe or trust? Doped and duped. That and more on my agenda today. It's time to talk. These are the faces that reminded Germany 1 year ago that the far right is alive and well and still able to kill. After months of embarrassing revelations, we ask, is Germany now getting it right in the battle to stop neo-Nazis? How much more disgrace and scandal can the sport of cycling continue to endure? The king of the road, Lance Armstrong, is now the hero that everyone wants to forget. But is he just the most visible icon of a sport that's rotten at its core? Should others be punished? And is anyone telling the truth about doping? And in Guatemala, fears are growing that the country's military may be returning to its old brutal and ruthless ways. Earlier this month, unarmed protesters were shot and killed by soldiers. Is the military maneuvering back into a controlling role in Guatemala's civil society? And is the fragile transition to democracy in jeopardy? Well, I have invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest says that Guatemala has become a place where the government doesn't listen to the people, and as we know now, the government is ready to use the military to shut the people up. I'm happy to welcome to the show Isabel Rosales. She's a political scientist on Latin America at the German Institute of Global and Area Studies here, or in Hamburg, I should say, not here in Berlin. Isabel, thanks for coming on the show. What is on the way for Guatemala? A military dictatorship, or do you see the people overthrowing the government?
Well, thanks for having me. I would say neither. You're probably right. There are some people who might think that the direction of Guatemala is going towards authoritarianism again, or that there might be a revolution.
But you think there's a peaceful way out of this?
I think there might be one.
All right.
And
we'll talk about that in just a second, if they can find a peaceful resolution from this. My second guest knows cycling through and through, the good and the bad. Sylvia Schenk was president of the German Cycling Federation until 2004, when she resigned in protest. That's correct. Sylvia, thanks for coming on the show. You quit because you said that top officials here in Germany, including doctors, wanted you to keep quiet about tests that revealed doping. Now, there are many more stories like yours that are coming out right now. I want to push this issue beyond the athletes. Is the entire cycling community complicit in doping, and is it breeding a culture of lying?
Well, many of the cycling community are, and the problem is that even those who don't want to be involved in doping don't really stand up against it.
All right, we're going to talk about if there are any remedies for cleansing the sport coming up in just a second. And my next guest says that Germany is no better equipped to fight the far right today than it was a year ago. He is definitely not Mr. Optimism, but I'm happy to welcome Daniel Köhler. He is the head of research at Exit Germany. It's an organization, Daniel, that helps neo-Nazis leave the far right scene and turn their lives around. So you have firsthand contact and information about this scene. You say nothing has changed in the fight against the far right. How is that possible?
Thanks for inviting me. First of all, if I wouldn't be an optimist, I wouldn't work for Exit to say that.
That's true. I agree with you on that.
I do say that a lot has happened since the discovery of the NSU, but really nothing, or at least not the essential things, have changed.
Yeah, we're going to talk about what has not changed, what has changed in the last 12 months, but I want to start with a quotation. Ticking time bombs are walking around this country. That is how a member of Germany's parliament describes the right-wing extremists in this country who have been charged with crimes but are still at large. Now, how many are we talking about? Well, the Interior Minister said last week that there are 110 arrest warrants for neo-Nazis who have gone underground in the last year. Now, this is not where the security forces and the government want to be. It's even more alarming when you consider that it was just 1 year ago when a story broke that revealed how easy it had been for far-right extremists to get away with murder.
German prosecutors believe the members of the National Socialist underground terror cell were behind a string of murders. 9 of them racially motivated killings of small business owners of Turkish and Greek origin. The 10th, a German policewoman. Germany's intelligence services apparently did not link the killings to right-wing extremism. Not until November 4th last year, when one of the group's members set fire to a house in the eastern town of Zwickau and 2 committed suicide, was the link exposed. A Bundestag committee is investigating the terror cell and the intelligence services activities. It's known they had a network of informants in the neo-Nazi scene that the cell's members belonged to. And yet, the group managed to spend almost 14 years underground and undetected.
So, Daniel, what has gone wrong in the last year?
It's actually a very long list, to be honest.
Let's go through it.
So, first of all, we have to see that a modern security system, one of the best in the world, actually failed to detect the very core of their work, what they are supposed to do. They were supposed to detect any threat of terrorism, domestic terrorism, in advance, very early, to stop it. So, but they didn't.
Okay, but that's what led up to the event last November. Right. But since then, you're saying that nothing has been done to correct those wrongs. I mean, do you really stand by that? Do you think there's no progress that we could talk about in the last 12 months?
The problem is that we are still right in the middle of investigating the whole thing. We still find out every day or every week new details of how this cell worked, how big or how large the support network was. Many new figures and details about the failures of the different parts involved. So we still are not able to really say to get on with the restructuring or to get on planning how we would actually change the thing. We are still investigating. We are still trying to find out.
There has been some progress. If you ask security forces, if you ask politicians, they'll say that there's a central database now which has been established, which helps all of the security units coordinate, share information. Is that something that you think is going to lead sooner rather than later to more arrests of people from the far-right scene?
Well, I think it's definitely an important tool for the security agencies to step up their work, to find this about 100 people we know are still on a warrant for some reason. But I guess you do have to do a lot more. We are talking about repression, the sole security aspect we're dealing with. And this is something I really find interesting, that from the early beginnings on, after we discovered the NSU, we were talking solely about the failures of the security system. We blamed the Verfassungsschutz, we blamed the police, the intelligence service.
Intelligence services, right.
But we didn't talk about the society. We didn't talk about the danger, the threat from the movement. We didn't talk about other strategies and tactics you can apply.
But what are you talking? You're talking about racism in society, intolerance,
we talk about racism.
Foreigners.
Yeah, we talk about the different groups and strategies of the movement itself. Many people in Germany think that the neo-Nazi movement basically comprises itself out of frustrated kids, of a bunch of disintegrated skinheads in Eastern Germany. But we have to accept that this movement actually forms kind of a counter society. They have different parts, different movements with different styles, different ideologies and tactics, and they're very keen on adapting to our society.
Well, you say adapting to our society, but they still feel disenfranchised by society, correct? I mean, they feel like they're on the margins.
Parts of it, yeah, but not all of them. They feed on our society.
Okay, so that means, I mean, I'm trying to get a picture here then of what a neo-Nazi in Germany looks like today. I mean, we know what the images are that we see in the media a lot, but are you saying that they've changed their uniform, that they look like you and I would look like walking down the street?
Well, that's a very important message, that there is no typical neo-Nazi. You do find these typical skinheads you would recognize immediately, but there are many others. There are, for example, autonomous nationalists. You would not be able to distinguish them from left-wing autonomous activists, for example. There are folkish racists that basically look like everyone else. We had, for example, the German KKK, and when they're not wearing their hoods, you wouldn't be able to recognize them. So there are many different styles, and that is an important message, really, that this movement is a radical social movement with many different faces.
So if it has many different faces, if it is a radical social movement, how are you able to pull people out of that and put them back into mainstream society? I mean, give us, if you would, give us a very brief crash course on how you reprogram the way these neo-Nazis think.
So Exit Germany is what we call a de-radicalization and disengagement program, one of the oldest and largest in the world, actually. So what we do is we use a passive approach. The people come to us that have some motivation, some reason, or some doubt about their belonging to their group, and they contact Exit. And then we start an individual disengagement, de-radicalization program with them that is hand-tailored to that individual. As so many different people come to us, mothers, adults in different backgrounds, with different family backgrounds, different
but when they come to you, Daniel, what do you say to them? What is done to make things click?
The problem is that each individual needs a different time, different amount of time, they have different practical hindrances, different reasons that keep them in, basically.
I mean, do they have an epiphany? I mean, is there one key experience that pulls them out of the scene?
Sometimes. Some people walk around with heavy doubts for years before they decide to leave their group, their friends, their family. Others have an experience that really starts them thinking about it. And then at some point, they contact Exit. And then we really find out the cracking points where, first, it's a combination of practical issues, really, safety, security issues, family issues, job issues, educational issues, but we always try to put the ideology at first hand. For us,
I mean, it sounds like social welfare programs that also include ideology, thinking, building. Let me pull in Isabel and Sylvia on this. I mean, what we're getting at here, I mean, what Daniel is saying is that society is not doing what it should to accept foreigners, to accept people who represent the other. Do you agree with that? I mean, we all live here in Germany. I mean, Isabel, what do you think?
Well, I actually agree. I think the bottom problem is that it's not only the fault of institutions. Of course, you could blame it on institutions and on coordination of policies, but I think society plays a big role in that, and families, schools, foundations, everyone needs to be aware of this happening, and the state needs to do it too, because otherwise they reproduce these races against minorities.
Sylvia, what do you say? I mean, you work with Transparency International. It's a group that tries to fight corruption, but it's also trying to bring greater enlightenment to society. Has Germany dropped the ball on teaching its citizens, its residents, to appreciate and accept the differences in others?
Well, I think we have different situations in different parts of Germany. I'm coming from Frankfurt, a city with a very high degree of foreigners living there, all kinds of foreigners. And there we have, during the last years, we have quite a good situation. We are working on it in schools and in other areas of social life. So I think it depends. There are more challenges in other parts of Germany. And with the financial crisis and with people being afraid of losing their job, of losing social security themselves, then the fear of foreigners increases. What I think is quite important with the NSU case we are just talking about, that with that the awareness has really arisen in Germany that we can never exclude if something happens that it has a very extremely right background, and that we have to be very, very attentive on this situation.
You know, there are all these calls here in Germany to take action, for example, to ban the NPD party. I know that movement has gotten momentum here, but my question is, what do you do with those people who are in that party once you ban the party?
Of course, that's the most important question.
Right?
They're still there. I know from dropouts at Exit that basically dropouts who led their own organizations that were banned, they had a plan B, they had a plan C, and they went on actually a couple of days after this organization was banned. So you cannot expect these people just to lay down and say, okay, they banned our party, now we go home.
I was reading, you had said that the neo-Nazi members are actually becoming very attractive to other groups of society now.
Right.
Hell's Angels, for example, I read, are recruiting neo-Nazi members because they value their skills in violence.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a commodification of hate.
Yeah, it's actually when you look into what these people trained themselves in, they don't have to leave out their ideology to make some money with the biker groups, actually. And these biker groups are very tolerant. It's very ironic that they are so tolerant about these people coming to them, working for them. Why not? From their perspective, it's a great deal.
Yeah. There are 2 points before we have to move on. I want to bring up the Eurozone crisis. A lot of people talking about another recession coming along. That's going to create more disparities in income in Germany. Is that something we should be, is that fueling the fire of far-right extremism? What's your take on that briefly? You talk to these people.
Yeah. Maybe maybe it's important for an upsurge for the general right-wing populist parties, like we've seen in Europe, but not for the hardcore, the militants. They've been around far longer than the Euro crisis. The NSU started far before that. So the hardcore is well detached from economic
It doesn't
issues.
matter what the economy is doing.
They play with the topic of globalization. Of course, they use it right now.
Yeah.
It comes as a gift for them. But they've been there before, and they will be there afterwards.
What about this idea, too, before we move on, that the security forces here in Germany are home to sympathizers of the far right? I mean, the people that are actually supposed to be fighting this may be too soft.
See, I don't want to blame the whole security system. I don't want to judge the police or the intelligence agencies, but that actually closes the circle. When you see right-wing extremism as a social movement, you do find people who are police officers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, social workers, anything you can imagine. And of course, these people try to get into these jobs, that they can change the system from within. It's called subcultural subversion. It's a strategy they apply. They don't have to be these stupid-looking, brutal skinheads. They can have the ideology, go to that job, do it, and enact it from within. So what we've seen in Baden-Württemberg, for example, with about 5 active police officers who've been member of the KKK and are still active police officers.
Yeah. So I mean, they can be hidden easily.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Do you think if we were to meet 12 months from now that we would be able to talk about serious progress, or do you still think things are going to be slow and changing?
I do hope so.
Yeah, you hope so. Yeah. There's the optimist coming out in it. All right, let's move on. There is a new word circulating on social media right now which describes the pathetic plight of professional cycling. The word is doplicity. Now, it's a clever combination of doping and duplicity. Yes, we are talking about the cyclists who have doped and who have lied, and the people who work for and above them who have lied too. The more you read, the more you think that this is bigger than a conspiracy to cheat. This is akin to a plague that infects almost everyone. And the biggest patient, of course, for now, is Lance Armstrong.
Stripped of his 7 Tour de France titles, almost all of his cycling achievements since 1998 wiped from the record books. Once revered in the world of professional cycling, Lance Armstrong has been described by the US anti-doping agency as a serial cheat who led a highly sophisticated doping ring. His fall from grace has embarrassed the sport and exposed a culture of doping in cycling. Its advocates say professional cycling is completely different from what it was in Armstrong's day. But his case raises many questions. Why wasn't Armstrong caught earlier? Did the sport's governing bodies play a role in doping? And why do top athletes risk so much by turning to banned practices?
Sylvia, why is Lance Armstrong the only person who is losing anything in this scandal?
As far as I know, they are still investigating some of the other cases, but we have about 14 or 16 cyclists who confess that they have been involved in the Armstrong system, and I think they will have to lose as well all the rankings they had during their careers.
So what is Armstrong then? Is he the sacrificial lamb for a sport that is trying to cleanse itself?
Well, it was not the sport itself trying to clean it, but it was the anti-doping agency of the US, USADA. They did it. They did the job. UCI tried to, the World Cycling Federation tried to pull it into its own responsibility, but USADA refused, and I think it was good like that. And USADA was really trying to find out the whole system of Lance Armstrong. There has been a lot of suspicion surrounding his career since the end of the 90s, but never there was any possibility to really catch him.
Okay, to catch him. I mean, that seems to be the point here, right? No one was able to catch him red-handed, but it seems the more information that comes out, a lot of people not only knew that he was doping, but they say they were actually witnesses to it and that they had talked about it. Why did we not hear any screaming coming from members of the UCI? I mean, why didn't we get the red flag thrown out years ago?
Well, most of the people just thought as long as there is no positive sample, there is no doping. And I think that's a little bit the attitude in cycling towards doping. I can take whatever I want. If I'm not caught, then it's fine. And it just started when the first cyclists started to talk about the system of Armstrong. I think the first one was Tyler Hamilton. He was caught with a positive sample. Mm-hmm. Then in the beginning he said, no, I never took anything. That was a mistake. In the end he confessed, and then he started to accuse Armstrong. And then afterwards, cyclist after cyclist started to talk as well. And it needed all these cyclists as witnesses to really do something.
But you left the UCI back in 2004 because you said that you were asked to keep hush about test results that were irregular. Your case cannot be the only case. I mean, you left. You left.
Yeah, I left because we had no positive sample at that time. We had just suspicious blood values. And at that time, even the public said, well, what is she doing such a fuss about it? It changed afterwards that people say, oh, suspicious blood values, that's a very clear hint on epo-doping or blood doping, so one has to do something about it. But at that time, I was 2 or 3 years too early with this opinion. That's why I, at that time, couldn't force the others to follow me, but they said, well, no, you are damaging cycling, talking about suspicious blood values.
The UCI has not given Armstrong's Tour de France titles to someone else. I mean, we've got 7 years here with no winner. What does that tell you?
Well, that tells me that the benefit of the doubt is gone within cycling, and that even the UCI says, well, we assume that all the other cyclists, even the very last one, has been involved in doping. Otherwise...
Well, that's not benefit of the doubt. That's assuming everyone's guilty.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay, so there's no benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I think they just got rid of the benefit of the doubt. That has been a very important principle all the time, and now it's just the opposite.
So now everyone's guilty.
Yeah.
Is everyone guilty?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, but you've been inside. What is your gut? If you had to put your hand in fire, Sylvia, what would your gut tell you, though? I mean, are your chances of finding someone who hasn't doped, are they fairly slim?
Well, I wouldn't put my hand in fire for anybody in men's cycling, for very few in women's cycling.
Okay. So the women tend to be a little bit more honest than the men.
Yes. They don't have the money to pay such a system as Armstrong did.
Okay. So it's about the money. All right. Cycling has... It's interesting. The more you read, you come to the conclusion that cycling has never been a no-tolerance sport. I mean, you could dope as a cyclist, and at some point later on you could be a team manager. That's almost a way of rewarding misbehavior. Are there any signs that that's going to change?
Well, I read that the UCI is discussing this issue and tries to find a way now how they can keep people out of the sport after they had a doping case themselves. Because with that, you are always transferring from one generation to the next the knowledge on doping, and then people can be blackmailed because they have been involved in earlier cases. Yeah. So they are just repeating what they have learned during all their career, and that has to be stopped.
Why do you think Armstrong, and I'll ask you guys this too, I mean, what your opinion is on this, why don't you think Armstrong is accusing others of doping? I mean, he's been very quiet. Why isn't, I mean, he's lost everything. He's lost everything. He has nothing else left to lose. Why doesn't he come out and tell what he knows?
Well, he still tries to keep, as far as I understand him, I'm not quite sure on that, he still tries to keep at least some of his fans with him and saying that that's all wrong what they are doing. And as far as I know, and I received some emails from cycling fans saying, well, but he was so a big cyclist and we should just keep him like he was and not criticize him.
No, that image is gone.
Yeah, but nevertheless, well, maybe one day he's going to talk. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, but what would you? Let me ask you guys, what would you like to see happen right now? Would you like to see Armstrong come out and give a mea culpa, say, you know, I did wrong, I'm sorry, but I wasn't the only one? Isabel, what would you like to see?
Well, I actually think that Armstrong should do that, apologize because of the example that he's setting. But I also think that it's a pity because it's not all his fault. So there is a system behind that it's profiting from that, an industry of pharmaceuticals, telecommunications, and he shouldn't be the only one who is apologizing, you know. So I think that's.
But maybe it has to start with him. I mean, Daniel, what do you think?
I don't think an apology would be very credible right now. So
maybe that's why he's being quiet.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't want to start the mud throwing.
Yeah.
Because when everyone's involved and he knows a great deal about that, then
it could get even uglier.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would actually like to say something that actually links both of your presentations. This happens also in other sports like football. I was right now thinking about the Euro Cup. I don't know if you remember that there were some expressions of racism during the Euro Cup, and they were highly ignored by this industry behind that. And well, they didn't apologize, did they? And
well, I mean, it depends who's in your ass. Some politicians refuse to go to the games in protest.
Yes.
I mean,
highly ignored, not completely ignored, but this happens still. So.
Yeah, but you did get talk about it, and there, you know, some athletes stayed home.
Yeah.
They didn't go to the games.
That's true.
Sylvia, let me ask you, you're with Transparency International. TI has come out with a recommendation on what cycling should do to repair itself. How to reform a sports governing body. This is the memo that TI came out with. One is instigate an independent investigation into what has happened. 2 is review the regulations on ethical behavior. 3 is instigate an independent review of the organizational structures. And 4 is produce a reform implementation strategy that includes monitoring. In other words, we need to have people checked up on. Who is going to do this? Because no one outside of UCI believes in the integrity of the people at UCI right now.
Well, that's why we asked for an independent commission to do that. It cannot be done by the UCI itself. It needs independent persons from different areas.
But UCI has to agree to this to begin with.
Yes, I think they are under such a big pressure that in the end, if such a commission is established, if they don't agree, they will be under very high pressure. They already are. So I think in the end, they have to
very
cooperate.
Very briefly, because we're running out of time. But what would a commission look like? I mean, Transparency International may actually be asked to help put this together. What would a commission look like?
Well, you need an expert on sports law, for example, someone representing the Court of Arbitration of Sport in Lausanne. You need an expert on anti-doping. You need people from cycling, at least 1 or 2, and cyclists, female cyclists. I would propose a national president of a national cycling federation, but not one being involved by a cyclist in the problem of doping.
And what about this notion of monitoring? I mean, do we need to have security guards on the buses, in the hotel rooms, to make sure that blood transfusions aren't taking place, to make sure that people aren't doping in the toilet? I mean, is that what we have to have?
Well, I've just read the USADA report, and if we look onto that, we have to admit that the current testing system doesn't really help, and so we need more measures to fight against doping. And so for the beginning, for let's say 2-3 years, we have to have things like that the teams agree in being searched at every time during the Tour de France, the refrigerator, the team bus, the bags of the doctors, and so on, just to make sure that there cannot be any doping during the Tour de France. And with that, we will make the first step.
And before we move on, very briefly, do you think that the UCI will succeed in rebuilding trust in the sport of cycling?
Well, I think it's very problematic with the persons being in charge of UCI right now, because they have been part of the system for many years.
And you think they should go?
Well, it's not up to me to say resign, please, but I doubt that they have the credibility to really find a new future for cycling.
Exactly, and I think what we're learning, and in our topics today, is optimism and credibility go hand in hand, and those are two things that cycling desperately needs right now. So let's move on. It is called military creep. Now, that is a term that is being used more and more to describe the increasing reach of the armed forces in the political development of Guatemala. Now, this Central American country has just recently emerged from decades of military rule. Since 1996, it has struggled to construct a civil society with clear division between the police and military. But events of the past few weeks have put that progress into question.
Hundreds of members of Guatemala's indigenous groups marched last week in protest at the killing of 8 indigenous demonstrators. They were shot in a clash with Guatemalan soldiers in the country's northwest during a rally against rising energy prices and proposed changes to the constitution and education system.
Our struggle is a fight for dignity. It's time to raise our heads.
The killings have highlighted divisions in the Central American country. Trade unions, teachers and students have been demanding more civil rights and greater equality. In Guatemala, 73% of the indigenous rural population lives below the poverty line. The situation is especially bad in the north of the country, where the poverty rate is twice that of urban areas. Guatemala is rich in resources, but is struggling with enormous social inequalities and an uncertain future.
So, Isabel, is Guatemala's future democratic, or is it a future with rule by the military?
Well, I'd like to think that it's democratic, and I think it's been proved by the last few years. After the peace agreements were signed in 1996, after the civil wars in the region, the last few governments were, well, they dealt with social protests and all sorts of conflicts pretty well. I mean, not great, but they didn't come to the point that we've reached so far this year.
Would you say, is the problem here President Perez Molina? I mean, is he a friend or a foe to a demilitarized society?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a militarized or demilitarized society. I think there are a lot of sequences that are still present in the society from the civil wars, and I think he's not militarizing the society back again. But
well, let me ask you about this. I mean, I'll give you an example. Something that happened in May. The president dispatched the military and the police to a town when protests turned violent. There were protests. There were people who were against construction of a hydroelectric dam in their town. The president declared a state of siege and denounced the protesters as members of a criminal conspiracy. Yes. That does not sound like a friend of a civil society that tolerates civil disobedience or even protest or even dissent.
Yes, you're totally right on that. I think we need to make a differentiation between militarizing the society. That would mean that he has lots of military in ministries and so on. That's not entirely true. He has a few militaries in some ministries, some key ministries, the defense and interior. But what you're saying, he's sending the military to
do what the police should do.
Exactly. That's another thing. That's using the military for purposes that are not supposed to be used.
Right.
And that what happened there in Varillas, Huehuetenango, that was very symbolic, because that was his first presidential decree. He declared a state of siege, a state of emergency, so that the people wouldn't have their constitutional rights.
And I'm wondering if we really shouldn't be so surprised. I mean, if you look at the president's pedigree, I mean, the president is a former Kabila. And we know that the Kabiles were behind some of the worst atrocities in the Civil War in Guatemala. If he's a part of that type of history, doesn't it make sense then, one could argue, a cynic could argue, that he is a person, a leader, who tends to use a heavy hand?
Yes, of course, and that's what he promised, and that's what the people voted for, the heavy hand, the mano dura.
Yeah, the mano duro, exactly. And that, from the outside, you have to ask yourself, okay, so what do the Guatemalans want then? They've got a society right now where the soldiers may actually shoot them, but it's being directed by the man they elected.
Yeah, well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
It's a very polarized society. There are a lot of conflicts that are unsolved, long-term conflicts, land, teachers asking for a raise, labor unions asking for all sorts of demands that have been unsolved for years now, and people are tired now of negotiating, and no one has answered their demands. And with this government, with the repression and all, this has come to a point where the conflict it's going wider.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking. Do you see some type of break coming with the military taking over again, or with the people rising up and overthrowing their government? I mean, do you see it getting to that critical mass?
Yes, it's clear that this year, with the election of Otto Pérez Molina, things changed in the country, especially on dealing with social protests. But it's also very positive that people are not staying at home and they are actually going to the streets, even with what happened in the recent events. Yes, things have changed, and the way he's handling everything are very completely different. So the police was used before to contain social protests, and now it's the military. That's a big difference. The other big difference, I would say, is that he's linking social protests to other groups like organized crime.
Organized crimes and drug cartels.
Cartels. And that's the excuse to take the military out, because we've signed in Guatemala and other countries in Central America regional initiatives with the U.S., Mexico, Colombia. So that's a regional problem too.
Sylvia, let me bring you in on this. What does Transparency International say about the health of civil society in Guatemala right now? Is it a precarious situation from where you're looking?
Well, I'm not an expert on the situation in Guatemala. I've been there 6 years ago, but things have changed a lot, I think, since then. I think, like in other countries in Central America, there is a huge corruption problem in Guatemala as well. And so there are many issues you have to really work on. What I just heard from my colleague here is that must be quite a weak president if he needs the military to help him, and if he's not able to talk to his own people. And I think learning from what we had with the Arab Spring and in some other countries, I think people nowadays don't accept any longer a situation like that, and that's some sign of hope.
Is this militarization or this heavy-handedness, is it making it difficult for Guatemala to deal with the horrors of the past, with the horrors that happened during the Civil War?
Yes, there's definitely some of that. People are used to that, to military, and that's also the problem, that they voted for an ex-military to rule their country because they were just desperate because of the rising violence and all the situation that it's going on there, and they voted again for a military, for an ex-military.
Hoping that he could change his ways, and Daniel's the man on that. I mean, it is realistic to think that someone can change their ways, even if they're in a position of power.
Absolutely.
But it's also a dangerous hope, isn't it?
I mean, of course, when he doesn't want to change, there's no reason to believe he will. On the other side, he was most part of his life a soldier, a professional soldier, and he was trained in using specific tools to deal with problems.
Right.
And I wouldn't expect him to have these soft kind of tools in his toolbox. Actually, I would expect that when it comes to certain issues, he tends to go back to his training and what he really learned to do. So I wasn't surprised to hear that.
Yes, exactly, and that's what I wanted to say also. Not only him, but the whole military, when they go and try to stop social protests, that they don't know what to do. I mean, if you look at what happened in Alaska in the 4th of October, where 8 people were killed, they just shot. The colonel who was in charge of this operation ran away. He didn't know what to do. They don't know what to do, but war. So if you send the military, that's what they're going to do.
Okay.
They're going to shoot.
So we're looking at a process then that's going to at least take a generation where not only are you trying to build a new civil society, but you're also trying to re-educate and reprogram the way people think. And you're optimistic about this.
Yes, absolutely. I think democracy has worked because, well, it's a long process. We're still a democracy in process, but I think we're not going towards an authoritarianism again or anywhere that. But
you feel good about it.
No, and also social movements and the international community have played a good role in that.
Okay.
In watching his
and
actions.
watching what he's doing and talking about it like we're doing right
Exactly.
here. Before we wrap up, of course, you know there's a big event coming up in a week, and that is the U.S. presidential election. And we're doing straw polls all over the place. I wanted to ask you three if you'd like to venture a guess who's going to win, just very briefly. Isabel, who do you think is going to win? Is it going to be an Obama or a Romney day?
Oh, I'm really hoping for Obama.
Okay.
Obama with Sandy's help.
Sandy's help with the hurricane. Very good. Daniel, what do you think?
No chance for Romney.
No chance for Romney. I think we are one-sided here. Okay. Thank you very much for coming on the show. That is going to round out the agenda this week. Join us next week for our special coverage of the U.S. elections. We'll be here in the studio Tuesday and Wednesday, and we put together an interesting group to talk about Obama and Romney. And if you're in the U.S., don't forget to vote. Stay clear of Sandy. We'll try to stay warm here in Europe. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Thanks for stopping by, and join me next time when I set the agenda.